What's interesting to me has been this sort of latest, Chuck Todd talking about the crisis at the border and them actually like bringing the ABC Sunday talk show down to the border and setting up it's not really a round table. It was like a big, huge, I don't know, like buffet table of people there. The compulsion, and there's a lot of things to talk about, but the compulsion to create a crisis for Biden's administration, as opposed to like the slow moving sort of real broader problems, right? Like, I mean, there is a policy decision that the Biden administration is going to have to make, and it is like put resources into processing these kids. But the idea that it has something to do specifically with like the border, like the border's falling, it's creating this sort of invasion narrative. And it's just basically sort of like, we're going to keep those people up in Minnesota in their lake houses really concerned about what's going to happen to those lake houses. And it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with like the way that we're treating these human beings. And it's sort of they can't sort of deal with that straight on.
I also don't think it's necessarily working for the broader Fox audience. I know this sounds crazy, but when you go on and you debate these things, there's certain topics that trigger people and they start tweeting you and messaging you and getting hateful. I actually got more responses from people saying, yeah, we should actually have a process for them to come in. I'm really curious what the polling is on this right now on the right, because it seems like there might actually be a split, and it might have been an embarrassment the way Trump dealt with refugees. I mean, these are children, these are babies. Everybody saw the photos. They even had them on Fox News. It's hard to distance yourself from a surge that was very much result of the fact that he had a zero tolerance policy and people were afraid to come. And I mean, you're right. The process needs to open up. There needs to be housing. It's not like the government. I mean, the response that the Bush administration person said on air yesterday about this on Fox News was that we don't have the resources to house them, which is just BS. So if that's the direction they're going in, rather than keep building the wall, keep pushing people out, keep the humanitarian crisis going, if their response is we just don't have the money, then I think that we're actually in a good position right now to push for stronger immigration policy that is more inclusive, humanitarian, et cetera.
The right is arguing that we don't have the money, as opposed to like the fundamental nature of our country is changing because we just let in 6,000 kids from Central America. Yeah,
exactly. Because people see the pictures. How can your heart not break unless you're a complete sociopath, which many people in this country are still.
Just quick point. I also just think it doesn't have as much teeth because Biden's not as scary to the same people that would have been scared about these immigration policies under the previous Democratic president.
I think that's right. It doesn't have the sort of same, durability or stickiness in some level. Here, put up this image. Henry Cuellar,
who sucks, by the way.
Be that as it may, had photos apparently that he took. They allowed lawmakers to tour some of these DHS facilities on the southern border. Here's his pictures. Really disturbing. And I mean,
is that like
I don't know if it's COVID-y, the plastic.
Do you see that centerpiece there? That looks like a prison watchtower. Is that what that is?
I would imagine. Yeah, that is probably what that is.
Oh my God. Well, it's a video, no?
We also have I don't know that we have video. We have pictures of that. Here is Vice President Harris saying that they inherited a challenging situation. I don't know. This seems a little platitudinous to me, but here it is.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we were left with a very challenging situation. And, let me start by saying I think we all agree, and Secretary Mayorkas said it a number of times this weekend, let's get these kids out of CBP custody, get them into HHS custody. We've got to treat this issue in a way that is reflective of our values as Americans and do it in a way that is fair and is humane. But we have to meet the moment. And And there's a lot of work going into that, and we expect to have success, but it's going to take a lot of work. I mean, again, we were presented when we came in with some serious challenges.
You didn't know that ahead of time when you were campaigning on the trail saying it's a humanitarian crisis and we need to shut these down immediately? Did you not realize it would take work to plan? No?
I, for one, thought that the Trump administration was going to competently tie things up in a comfortable little bow, and they would have handled this. I'm frankly a little surprised because
for the good of the country.
One of the things that we learned about the Trump administration, much as I disagree with some of their policies, they're really competent at this stuff, and they really cared about making sure that we had robust and vigorous and sustainable systems to deal with every aspect of government.
But I'll keep saying this. I mean, the system is what is exploitative. The fact that the Biden administration has come in and has decided to just kind of rescind what the openly cruel policies of the Trump administration, that's what this creates, right? This kind of chaos, because there isn't an actual conversation about abolishing ICE, and there isn't an actual conversation about changing the bedrock of our immigration policy. And so you have...
Well, I'm going to differ just a little bit. I'm going to play a little devil's advocate. He has presented an immigration bill to Congress. He has, I'm not saying that this is anywhere close near where it needs to be, but ICE is not allowed to deport people for, I think, for another 100 days. They've, stopped. This is all within the first week and a half of his presidency. They've stopped border wall production, which I can't believe we're even building the border wall. So there have been very significant things, not to mention welcoming unaccompanied minors over the border. He has openly said you can come and pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients. That's all in the first 100 days. Will he get to shutting down ICE? Probably not. But
done this. I'm not talking about the immigration bill, which I think is a good bill, which is not going to pass, it seems that way, without an abolition of the filibuster, which may not even do it because of how Manchin's going to posture. This is about the policing of the border, and that I think is an entirely separate issue. It's about the militarization of the border, and that's the kind of big picture thinking that needed to be done in order to avoid these humanitarian crises that Biden is uninterested in having that conversation, in my view, in a more systemic way.
I also think, I mean, even if you don't get that sort of systemic, we know that there's a precedent where Donald Trump laid it out, really, basically, where you can reappropriate some funds in an emergency. And this looks like an emergency to me. And if you need more processing capacity to get these kids out of custody of the CBP and get them into Health and Human Services and set them up with some type of foster situation or get them to their relatives, you do it. I mean, that's the thing, is that this is a resource question, period, end of story. And do you know how much money is being made now by some of these private facilities that you remember, the private?
Way
it is $750 per child.
Individual. Yeah.
Now, do the numbers here, folks. 4,000 kids, 5,000 kids. Maybe it's a little bit more. Maybe 6,000, 7,000, 8,000. I've heard numbers up to 9,000. Do the numbers there. I mean, we're talking, millions of dollars over the course of a week. This is a multi-billion dollar business. And I mean, I can't remember the piece right now, but I distinctly remember interviewing people 10 years ago that the private prison industry were basically, their long-term projections were, we're going to have a problem. We're looking at the trends. Crime is going down. From a political standpoint, we're looking at criminal justice reform. So we're moving into the immigration detention sector.
I think that's Biden's reform, though, too. Maybe it's like 4% of.
Well, that was federal prisons, and that my understanding, I think that had happened under Obama. Back after Trump, but I'm talking about detention centers for immigration. That is still farm out. To private contracts.
Well, they should. I mean, that is a simple solution right there, a systemic solution. Cut the private contracts. Government should be able to handle this. Cut them immediately. We have the funding to create fair, just transition housing. We have the resources to do this. It's not going to happen overnight. Clearly, systems are going to have to be put in place. But, if you want to start pulling away from this this is the biggest surge in 20 years. This is insane in terms of a surge of folks at the border. So they had to see that coming. That's what I don't understand. What they've been, the deep-rooted systemic stuff has to be addressed. The militarization at the border, which, is, if you've ever been to the border, it is shocking. Like, there's layers of walls, there are drones, it's horrifying to see the militarization at the border. And even the communities that live at the border, if you live in Nogales, Mexico, and Nogales, Arizona, they go back and forth. It's disrupted the communities and the businesses along the border as well. So you have a whole other, aspect of this in terms of like border cities that have been economically like ravaged because they're used to the back and forth transitions. So, there's a real like reversal that needs to happen prior to Obama.
Let's be clear about this too, right? I don't know that there is necessarily a surge of like immigrants coming up. There's the seasonal increase, but what happened is this Rule 42, I think it is.
Yeah, or Title 42.
Title 42. This essentially is a shutting down of the border, ostensibly as an emergency procedure because of COVID. Trump instituted this. Right. And what the Biden administration did, and it's probably illegal.
I was about to say, it's 100% illegal under international law.
Under international and statutory law in this country in terms of asylum, right? Like, you have to process people. But what we've been doing is, at the border, we've been just saying, like, we're not processing you. You don't cross this line, period, end of story. Despite the fact that that's our statutory obligation and international law obligation. So instead, what the Biden administration said is, okay, we're going to rescind Title 42 just for unaccompanied minors. So a lot of people at the border said, okay, well, we're going to send our children in because where we are now is a crap show. There's crime, it's dangerous, et cetera, whether we're talking about they're coming from other countries in Central America or they're basically just jammed up at the border in Mexico. So they're sending their kids across here. But here's the thing, and this is all ostensibly about COVID. We know, that the immigrants at the border have less of an incidence of COVID than they do in Texas, the state. So in other words, like, you let people in, you'll actually drive down the incidence of COVID because the percentage of COVID amongst these immigrants is less than it is in Texas. But also, there's still people going back and forth on the border through if they're documented, if they have, a green card or whatever it is. You have people traveling across that border now, and there's no COVID concerns. So it's all BS. And if you let them in with their families, you can then just basically do the process that we had pre-Trump, which is allow them to go into the community, put them in the system. The amount of the rate in which these people show up for their court dates is like somewhere in the high 80s, if not low 90%. And that's what you do. But for whatever reason, and I'm willing to accept that there is some like just sort of like mechanical, like these are big apparatus and they've been degraded.
Bureaucratic concerns should not trump the humanitarian concerns.
Well, it's not just a question of concerns. It's also, on some level, it's also like, can we actually do this? It may be a question of like of expending just dollars. I'm willing to accept some measure of that, but we're getting beyond that point.
You're saying like the feasibility of actuating these systemic changes, root changes immediately to keep up with the crisis are not feasible in like the next few months.
Oh, I'm willing to accept that there's been, that it's going to take some time, but we're close to the time where you can accept.
But I'm not even willing to, I'm sorry, I'm not even willing to accept the framing of it as a crisis. I think it's a bureaucratic concern, and like, this is not humanitarian. It's humanitarian based on how we're housing them, but like the entrance of migrants into this country is, in my view, not a crisis, and it's largely manufactured by a media that is interested in giving right-wing talking points that are based in xenophobia more credence than they deserve. That's just my view.
Well, I think the crisis is the fact that you have unaccompanied minors who are alone and babies who've been separated from their parents. And when Biden says it's not a crisis, it's not a crisis, stop calling it a crisis. I'm from the perspective of as long as you have kids who are underage stuck at these borders, with horrifying. We've read the stories, horrifying accounts of what have happened, and some who will never, ever, ever see their parents because it is almost impossible to find them at this point because they have been, sent back in dangerous situations with coyotes that are already, predatory. I mean, these are situations in which people don't. I mean, the fact that Biden says stay home. What? So the cartel can kill me? Stay home so that like my family these are the stories of so many people that are coming from Central America right now. And then Mexico is playing games like we won't house them unless you give us vaccines. Like this is a diplomacy issue as well. And it's really gotten to the point where I think Americans are, it's not a crisis. I think it is a crisis. I think this is a unique situation, even more unique than the late 90s when there was a large surge at the border.